Keira Langston was a rising voice against police corruption until two crooked cops bribed a judge to frame her for drug trafficking. Dragged from her community and into a courtroom, she faced public shame and a system rigged to silence her. But what the officers didn't know was that Keira wasn't just fighting for her freedom. She was walking into court as their new boss. Can a woman they tried to destroy become the force that takes them down? If that question hits you, like, share and stay with us. The real story is just beginning. They say Redbrook used to be a town where neighbors left their doors unlocked, where the local paper still printed births and bake sales. But that was before the rot settled in, before the uniforms started choosing who justice applied to. It didn't happen overnight. It never does. It crept in slowly under budget cuts, backroom deals, and a silence so thick you could taste it in the air. But then there was Keira Langston. She didn't march in with a bullhorn or stage protests in the streets. That wasn't her way. Keira was calm, measured, and damn sharp. A black attorney who didn't just practice law, she respected it. And in a town like Redbrook that made her dangerous, she didn't shout. She questioned. She didn't accuse. She revealed. And in every courtroom she stepped into, she left cracks behind in a system that wasn't built for people who looked like her to thrive. People trusted her, not just the black community, but the quiet ones, the overlooked. Even some white families who'd seen their sons taken down by police lies came to believe in her. They whispered her name in coffee shops. They watched city council meetings again because Keira Langston had a way of asking the one question nobody wanted on the record. And that scared the hell out of men like Travis Maddox. Travis had been wearing a badge in Redbrook for over 20 years, long enough to know which judges could be bought and which crimes could be buried. He wasn't the loudest cop or the most violent, but he was the one who pulled the strings. And his partner, Ryan Hale, well, Ryan was the fists to Travis's whispers. You didn't want to end up in a room with both of them, unless your story had already been written for you. The problem was Keira had unwritten too many of their stories. There was that teenager they tried to pin a robbery on. Keira had proved the footage had been tampered with. Then there was the single mother charged with assault during a traffic stop. Keira got the body cam footage released. Charges dropped. Internal affairs never followed up, but that didn't matter. What mattered was the headlines. And Travis hated headlines he couldn't control. So when the mayor's office quietly nominated Keira Langston to serve on the new Civilian Oversight Board, the very board that would have power to investigate police misconduct, Travis didn't just feel threatened. He felt exposed. He sat in the back of his squad car that afternoon, the radio crackling beside him, watching Keira from a distance as she walked out of the municipal building. She looked confident, dressed in that dark green blazer she wore on days she knew she had work to do. He hated how calm she always looked, like she knew she couldn't be touched. Ryan was in the driver's seat, chewing on a toothpick, eyes locked on her like she was prey. He muttered something about how she walks like she owns this town. Travis didn't answer. He just stared. Because in his mind, she did own it now. Not in power, not yet, but in perception. And that was enough to make her a threat. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Ryan finally said, voice low. Travis didn't blink. "We've done subtle. We've done scare tactics. And she's still here." Ryan turned toward him, half grinning. Travis spoke slowly. "So now we bury her." It wasn't just anger. It was self-preservation. Men like Travis didn't fear lawyers, they feared proof. And Keira had proven time and again that she wasn't afraid to go looking. She didn't take payoffs. She didn't make backroom calls, and she didn't care whose badge number was on the file. That kind of person didn't belong in their world. They'd tried warning her. Years ago, Travis had pulled her over without cause, claimed she fit a vague description. She'd smiled and handed him her card. She knew the game. He thought she'd walk away scared. She didn't, and now she was one vote away from having subpoena power over the department. That evening, Travis made a call, a private number. One that didn't show up on city records. The voice on the other end didn't ask who he was. He simply said, "It's time. I want her discredited, for good." The voice paused. "Charges, big ones. Drugs, something with weight. I want it to look federal, Scare the public, break her reputation, make her name unclean. A sigh. And the judge, I'll handle him. Travis hung up. He didn't look at Ryan, didn't say another word. But the silence between them was agreement enough. Because in Redbrook, power didn't fear truth. It feared the woman who carried it like a mirror. And Keira Langston was about to be shattered. The Hollow didn't have a sign out front. It didn't need one. The right people knew where to find it. The air inside smelled of old whiskey and older regrets, and no one asked questions when 3 men walked in without a smile among them. Judge Nathan Callahan was already seated when Travis Maddox and Ryan Hale arrived. He looked smaller than usual, hunched forward in the booth, tie half undone, drink untouched. He didn't greet them. Didn't have to. They'd all come here for the same reason. Travis slid into the seat across from him, calm like a man placing a noose on the table and waiting for someone to step into it. We need a warrant, Travis said, tonight. Callahan didn't move. For who? Keira Langston. The name punched the air out of the booth. The judge blinked, sat back and looked at Travis like he'd just suggested burning down City Hall. You out of your mind, he said. She's not some 2-bit street dealer. She's clean. Respected. Hell, she's 2 steps away from a federal bench nomination if she plays her cards right. Which is why Travis said evenly, we take her out now, before she takes us out. Callahan stared him down. You want me to sign off on framing her? We're not framing her, Ryan cut in. We're giving the people a reason to doubt her. That's all it takes. No one remembers the acquittals, Judge. Just the headlines. Callahan shook his head, but Travis wasn't finished. You owe me, he said, voice dropping. You remember that night. The wreck on County Road 18. Your Lexus. The blood on the bumper. You had no business driving, but I cleaned it up. I made it disappear. I kept your name clean so your daughter wouldn't grow up reading it in a headline. And now, I'm calling it in. Callahan's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. Travis pressed forward, deadly calm. We've got a story ready. A shell company sending her payments. A bag of coke in her office desk drawer. Text records. Anonymous tip. She goes down hard and the board seat stays empty. We keep breathing. Callahan looked like he was about to choke. You're not just burying her career. You're burning her life. Travis didn't blink, so Ryan leaned in. We're grabbing her this Saturday. Big community event. Cameras, speeches, kids in matching shirts. We want this to hurt. You'll drag her out in front of children, Callahan asked, voice rising. Travis locked eyes with him. Exactly. It sends a message. To her. To the community. To anyone else thinking of coming after us. The judge swallowed hard. His hand trembled as he reached into his briefcase. He wasn't signing because he agreed. He was signing because he was cornered. Because he'd already made the mistake of owing these men something, and now it was time to pay. He pressed the seal into the paper with shaking hands. His signature bled across the page like guilt. Travis stood, took the papers without a thank you. No leaks, no questions. You've done your part. Ryan followed him out, his boots echoing across the dirty floor. Callahan didn't move for a long time. He just sat there, eyes fixed on the photo of his daughter that he kept tucked in his wallet, her smile now looking like an accusation. And as the bar door swung shut behind them, the truth settled like smoke in the booth. They weren't afraid of Keira's power. They were afraid of what she might uncover if they let her live long enough to speak. The applause was still echoing through the school auditorium when the doors slammed open like a gavel falling too early. Keira turned at the sound smile still on her face from the last line of her speech. Stand for something, even when you stand alone. She hadn't seen the storm yet, but the crowd had. 2 men in tactical jackets stormed down the aisle like they were raiding a cartel hideout, not a high school. Keira Langston. One of them barked, voice cutting through the silence like a siren. You're under arrest. Step away from the podium. The students gasped. Teachers froze. Phones rose recording. Keira's hands instinctively lifted, not in surrender, but disbelief. What is this? She asked, her voice low and steady like she didn't believe what she was hearing. You're under arrest for felony drug trafficking, conspiracy to distribute, and financial fraud. She blinked. That's not possible. But they didn't respond. One grabbed her wrist, the other reached for cuffs. The metal clinked louder than the stunned silence around her. And just like that, before a room full of teenagers who had hung on her every word a moment earlier, she was shackled like a criminal. The cameras caught everything. The press had arrived before the police. This wasn't just an arrest, it was an ambush. Across the street, Ruth Langston, Keira's grandmother, stood on the curb holding a small bouquet of sunflowers, her Sunday hat trembling in her hands. She came to surprise her granddaughter. Now she stood paralyzed as the back door of the cruiser slammed shut. Her eyes locked on the window where Keira sat, wrists bound, head lowered. But Ruth didn't cry. She couldn't, because some betrayals don't draw tears, they steal breath. By sunset, Keira Langston's name was no longer hers. It belonged to the headlines. Civil rights attorney arrested in major drug bust. Keira Langston activist or drug queen pin. Justice warrior exposed as criminal mastermind. News anchors speculated like vultures circling. Analysts nodded solemnly while dissecting bank records, fuzzy images of her office voice recordings too perfect to question. The evidence was overwhelming. Too overwhelming, like it had been waiting, packaged and timed to detonate. And the public, they turned fast. Old clips of Keira calling out police corruption were re-edited, taken out of context. Her most powerful quotes now weaponized against her. One post showed her standing beside a black teen she'd helped free last year. The caption, was she protecting him or recruiting him? Even people she'd once defended stayed quiet. Worse, some friends began to distance themselves publicly. I never really knew her, one said. She always had a chip on her shoulder, said another. Maybe we ignored the signs. The betrayal wasn't loud. It was slow, quiet, like a tide pulling her away from everything she'd built. Within 24 hours, her nonprofit funding was frozen. Community boards removed her name. The mayor's office issued a sterile statement about respecting due process while suspending her nomination indefinitely. Her law license under review. And in the eye of it all, Keira sat in a gray cell under flickering lights, her body still but her mind in chaos. She had spent her life teaching people how the system could be challenged. Now she was learning how quickly it could turn and swallow you whole. A guard passed by, glanced at her like she was any other suspect. Not a lawyer, not a leader, just another mugshot waiting to happen. But Keira didn't cry. She didn't beg. She stared straight ahead, because deep down something sharper than rage was growing. Not fear, clarity. They had taken her freedom, her name, and her dignity in public. Now they'd given her something back in return. A reason to destroy the system that did this. And this time she wouldn't fight it from the outside. The cell was colder than it needed to be. Not freezing. Just enough to settle into your bones and stay there like a quiet punishment. Keira sat on the cot, knees together, back straight, counting the cracks in the cement wall. They hadn't allowed her a change of clothes. The dark blue dress she wore to speak to the students still clung to her like a uniform of shame. 20 hours a day in isolation. No window, no clock. Just the dull hum of recycled air and the echo of keys that never stopped moving outside the door. They called it administrative separation for her own protection. But anyone who's lived through the system knows what that really means. They were keeping her out of sight. They wanted her forgotten. The guards barely looked her in the eye. Meals were slid in like she was an animal, not a woman who'd once dined at city banquets and lectured at law schools. The silence wasn't just in her cell. It followed her like a shadow, intentional, designed, meant to choke the spirit. But Keira didn't flinch. Because she'd been here before, not in this building, but in this place. She was 17 when it first happened, caught standing outside a liquor store just minutes after it had been robbed. She had no connection, no weapon, just the wrong place, wrong skin, wrong expression. The officer who cuffed her that day didn't listen when she tried to explain. He said, "You looked guilty enough." She sat in that station 3 hours before anyone told her she could leave. No apology. No record, no justice, just that empty burning silence in her chest. It was the first time she learned what it meant to be invisible and dangerous at the same time. Now, years later, she was back in that silence. But different, stronger, sharper, and she wasn't 17 anymore. Late that evening, the door opened. A young man stepped in, briefcase tight in one hand, nerves tight in the other. "Ms. Langston," his voice cracked a little. She didn't answer right away. He cleared his throat. "My name is Evan Boone. I'm your appointed defense attorney. I'm here to help." Keira looked up slowly. He couldn't have been more than 30. Fresh suit, fresh face. His tie was crooked. His hands were clean, but he didn't smell like power. He smelled like someone who still believed this system could be saved. She tilted her head. "Do you believe I'm guilty?" Evan paused. Too long. She saw it, the hesitation, the fear of picking the wrong side in a case that already had its villain. "No," he said finally. "I believe something's very wrong here." That was enough. Not trust, but a start. He pulled out a folder. They have texts, wire transfers, surveillance footage. It's all too neat. Keira leaned forward. "So you see it too?" "Yes. But you're up against people who planned this down to the minute. This wasn't sloppy. This was a message." She nodded once. He noticed she didn't ask for proof. He stayed an hour. He asked questions, took notes, fumbled at times, but he listened. And in a system full of noise that made him rare. The next morning, during the brief window when they allowed personal effects, a small package arrived from Ruth Langston. A single worn paperback inside, one Keira had read in college, a novel about growing under pressure. Between the pages pressed flat was a strip of paper folded twice. On it, her grandmother's handwriting. "If they try to bury you, grow anyway." Keira pressed it to her palm like a vow. She didn't cry. Instead, she began to observe every guard's name, their expressions, how often they checked in, which ones lingered too long at the door. She memorized the smell of the hallway, the brand of the soap in the shared sink, the angle of the camera above her head, the exact time her meals arrived, what they said when they thought she couldn't hear. She started writing it all in her mind, each detail recorded like evidence, even if there was no paper or pen. Because silence isn't surrender. Silence is strategy. They wanted her quiet so the story could be rewritten without her. But Keira Langston had survived worse than this. And this time when she came back, she wouldn't be alone. Lucia Vega hadn't even earned her first commendation yet. She was 8 months into her badge. A Latina rookie with quiet eyes and steady hands, raised in a neighborhood where trust in police came slow and rarely. She joined to be the kind of cop she'd wished had shown up when her brother was beaten behind a liquor store and no one filed a report. So when they assigned her to back up on what was supposed to be a routine arrest at the community center, she said yes. They didn't tell her the woman they were arresting was Keira Langston. They didn't need to. It wasn't her job to ask. Lucia remembered the scene too clearly. Keira standing before a group of high school students in the middle of talking about integrity and service when the cuffs clicked around her wrists. The crowd went quiet. Flashbulbs didn't. And through it all, Keira didn't resist. Didn't raise her voice. She just looked at Lucia for a moment, long enough to leave something heavy behind. Lucia had seen real criminals go down fighting. She knew this didn't feel right. But she stayed silent. That silence followed her for days. It waited behind every breath. Then she was told to help file a follow-up report on the arrest. That's when the wrongness became fact. The time of arrest didn't match the original logs. It placed Keira in a location she hadn't been yet. Not a typo, Lucia double-checked 3 different systems. The body cam footage, corrupted. Entire file structure gone. She tried pulling from the backup archive, but the metadata had been scrubbed. Timestamps wiped, access records missing. It didn't look like a mistake. It looked like someone meant to erase something. Lucia sat in the precinct's locker room that evening, staring at her notes, heart pounding. Her training hadn't covered this part. Not what to do when it's your own people bending the truth. Not when the badge starts to weigh more like guilt than pride. But she remembered what her mother used to say just before leaving for her janitorial shift at the courthouse. If you walk past something dirty and pretend you didn't see it, it's yours now too. She knew she couldn't carry that. So with trembling fingers, she reached for an old burner phone she hadn't used since her academy days. Found an encrypted tip line for Darren Matthews, the same investigative journalist who'd taken on the police union scandal 2 years ago and nearly lost everything. She didn't leave her name, just a quiet message and a file dump. "There's more than you think," she said into the receiver, her voice almost inaudible. "Start with the timestamp. Then ask why the footage disappeared." She deleted the call, pulled the SIM, sat still for a long time after that. The next few days she kept her head down, smiled when spoken to, acted like nothing had changed. But Ryan Hale, the senior officer who had handled the physical evidence in Keira's case, started acting differently. He lingered longer in the break room when she was there, made too much eye contact in morning briefings. One afternoon he passed by her desk and patted the top of her files, his voice low. "You keeping your notes tidy?" Vega wouldn't want you getting in over your head. She nodded, laughed, but her stomach twisted. That night she went home and pulled out the notebook she hadn't touched in months. Not for work, not for anyone. Just something she'd started as a teenager when her world felt too big to hold inside. She wrote what she couldn't say out loud. I'm not important. I'm not powerful. But if I let this pass, if I close my eyes, I won't be anything at all. They tried to bury her. But maybe I can dig. She didn't sign it. Just closed the book and slipped it under her mattress. Because now she wasn't just a witness. She was part of the story. And whether she liked it or not, the wall they'd built to hide the truth was already starting to crack. The courtroom smelled like polished wood and quiet resentment. It was the kind of morning where everyone wore stiff suits and even stiffer expressions. The press had been allowed in the back 2 rows, but the judge made it clear this trial wasn't a spectacle. Not publicly, at least. But everyone in that room knew better. Judge Nathan Callahan took his seat with the weight of someone who had already made up his mind. He barely looked up. The prosecution opened strong, confident, a little too polished. They painted Keira as a calculated manipulator, someone who used her legal knowledge to stay 2 steps ahead of justice. They laid out evidence, like a stage play, bagged narcotics, fabricated phone logs, wire transfers to untraceable accounts. It all sounded convincing if you didn't know how easily those things could be built from nothing. Evan Boone sat beside Keira, trying to mask the tightness in his jaw. He was younger than anyone else at the table, and he knew they looked down on him for it. But what made his skin crawl wasn't their arrogance, it was the judge. Callahan didn't even pretend to be neutral. He overruled nearly every objection Evan made. When Evan asked for the evidence to be re-examined by an independent lab, something completely reasonable in a case, this serious Callahan dismissed it without explanation. The chain of custody is intact, counselor. Move on. And when Evan pressed further, asking to present inconsistencies in the arrest report, Callahan leaned forward and said, "You're not here to waste this court's time with theories." Keira hadn't spoken a single word since entering the courtroom. She sat straight, shoulders square, eyes fixed ahead. And yet, despite the silence, she commanded attention. The jury couldn't stop glancing at her. Something about the way she looked at them, steady, not pleading, made it hard to turn away. She wasn't asking for pity. She was daring them to see her. That afternoon, during a short recess, Evan stepped outside the courtroom to catch his breath. The heat clung to the walls of the hallway. His tie felt like a noose. That's when the court clerk approached, quiet, hesitant, and handed him a small envelope. "No sender. Said it was urgent." Inside was a single piece of paper, 2 words at the top, Lucia Vega, and below it, in barely legible print, "Call her to the stand. She has what you need." Evan stood still for a moment. He knew the name, remembered her face from the arresting officer roster. She'd barely been mentioned in court, almost invisible in the file. But this changed everything. He walked back into the courtroom with fire behind his eyes. The prosecution had just begun another carefully worded monologue when Evan stood. "Your Honor," he said, voice clear. "The defense requests a recess to file a motion to call a new witness, Officer Lucia Vega." The courtroom shifted. Callahan frowned. "This name wasn't on your list, Mr. Boone. I understand that. But we've received new information that directly challenges the integrity of the evidence presented." Callahan glanced toward the prosecution. The lead attorney stood already shaking his head. "This is another attempt to derail the process. We've established every link in the chain." No, Evan snapped louder now, stepping closer to the bench. "You've claimed every link. But if justice is just a performance in this courtroom, then let's pull back the curtain and see what's really behind it." Callahan narrowed his eyes. "Watch your tone, counselor." But Evan didn't back down. "I'm not here to protect anyone's feelings. I'm here to protect the truth. And if this court has even a shred of interest in the law, not politics, not appearances, but the law, then let me bring in the one person who saw it all unfold." A long pause. You could hear someone clear their throat in the gallery. Then, without a word, Callahan picked up his gavel and struck it once. "Recess granted. Be back in 20. Evan sat down, chest pounding. Keira didn't turn to him. She didn't have to. She simply reached for the glass of water in front of her, took a slow sip, and placed it back on the table like someone who knew. The tide had just started to turn. No one breathed when Officer Lucia Vega took the stand. Her name hadn't been mentioned once until that morning. And now here she was, called out of nowhere, eyes steady, uniform pressed crisp like it was her armor. You could feel the prosecution stiffen the second she entered. Not out of respect, out of panic. Lucia sat. She didn't fidget, didn't blink too fast, just looked straight ahead as she raised her hand and took the oath. And then she began. "I was one of the officers present during the arrest of Ms. Keira Langston," she said, voice level but piercing. "And I believe the official records connected to that arrest were manipulated." The room cracked with silence. Jurors shifted. The lead prosecutor scribbled something quickly, like he could write fast enough to keep control. Evan Boone stepped forward, calm but hungry. "What do you mean by manipulated, Officer Vega?" Lucia opened the folder she'd brought herself. No one had seen its contents until now, not even the defense. "The arrest report," she said, "lists the time of detainment as 11:46 a.m. But our dispatch logs show that Sergeant Hale and Officer Maddox didn't arrive until 12:13. Evan nodded slowly. "You're sure?" "Positive," she said. "And that discrepancy places Ms. Langston in two places at once." She turned to the judge. "That's not a clerical error, that's a fabrication." The courtroom felt suddenly smaller, like the walls had inched in. Lucia didn't stop there. "I also accessed the body cam registry. The footage from that day was labeled corrupted, but the logs show that it was manually accessed and deleted. The deletion trail ends with one user, Sergeant Ryan Hale." The name struck like thunder. The prosecutor immediately rose. "Objection. Hearsay and..." "Overruled," Judge Callahan said, voice dry. Lucia reached for a small recorder from her breast pocket. "There's more." The sound system buzzed. Then came a voice, low, tense, and unmistakably Ryan Hale. "You saw something, didn't you?" Pause. "You don't want to start a fire, you can't put out Vega. Look the other way. That's how you make it here." Cut to silence. The courtroom exploded, not in noise but in energy, like every eye had just snapped open at once. A ripple of disbelief moved through the gallery. Evan's voice cut through it. "And what about the evidence seized from Ms. Langston's car?" Lucia glanced at him, then reached for a sealed envelope. Evan handed over an independent lab report. "Tested yesterday," Evan said. "It's not cocaine, it's baking soda. That's what they used to arrest her. That's what they built their entire case on." Even Callahan leaned forward for the first time since the trial began. Lucia cleared her throat. "And that, Your Honor, is why I couldn't stay silent." It was the first time in the trial that Keira looked directly at the judge. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. But her silence wasn't the silence of defeat anymore. It was the stillness of a gathering storm. Callahan's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the gavel. "The court will take a brief recess," he muttered. "Further review is required." He didn't say more. Couldn't. Because for the first time, the truth had cracked through the ceiling, and outside they were already chanting. Keira's name echoed from the courthouse steps. The sidewalk was packed. Reporters, supporters, protesters, everyone holding up signs, phones, their voices calling for what the court wouldn't say out loud yet. Keira was framed. And just like that, what started as a secret behind closed doors had become something no one could ignore. Not anymore. It started with an envelope. No return address, no fingerprints. Just slipped through the courthouse back door and left in a plain manila file on Evan Boone's desk that morning, like a warning or a gift depending on how you looked at it. Inside were records, 3 of them. Arrest reports, internal memos, court transcripts, all from cases that had gone through Redbrook's system in the last 5 years, all signed somewhere somehow by Officer Travis Maddox, and all carrying the same rot Keira's case had uncovered. Same evidence inconsistencies, same time gaps, same conveniently corrupted video footage, but this time they weren't alone. A typed note was clipped to the last file. "There are more, but you need to survive this one first." The cracks were no longer whispers. They were beginning to shout. That afternoon, back at the precinct, Ryan Hale sat in a squad car parked 2 blocks from the courthouse. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned pale. Sweat rolled down the side of his neck, but he didn't wipe it. Across from him, Travis leaned back, chewing on a toothpick like it was just another day. But Ryan wasn't calm anymore. He wasn't even trying to be. "They're gonna flip her testimony," Ryan said, voice low, flat. "You heard the audio. They're gonna pull everything apart." Travis shrugged. "They don't have enough. Lucia's just a rookie with a badge and a grudge. We keep quiet, we ride it out." "No," Ryan muttered. "We don't ride out anything. We run. Travis, I'm serious. We need to go. Tonight. Before this whole thing blows." But Travis didn't respond. Not really. Just stared straight ahead. He'd built this web so carefully for years he couldn't believe it was finally unraveling over one black woman who didn't know her place. He refused to. That evening, while the city buzzed with protests and press vans, something else hit the internet, something bigger than hashtags. An investigative expose dropped like a match on gasoline. The title was simple: The Redbrook Machine, 10 Years of Injustice Engineered by Power. It was written by Darren Matthews, the same journalist Lutia had contacted weeks earlier, and it pulled no punches. The article traced a decade of fraudulent charges, coerced confessions, mysteriously lost footage, and patterns of cooperative judges rubber-stamping one-sided warrants. At the center of it all was the name Travis Maddox, and just beneath him, a small circle of badge-wearing enforcers, including Ryan Hale. The story exploded across the state within minutes. Phones lit up, screens buzzed, and outside the courthouse the crowd grew thick with signs that no longer asked for answers, they demanded consequences. Inside, Evan wasted no time. He stood before Judge Callahan and submitted a formal motion to disqualify the prosecution for misconduct supported by the new evidence. He knew it wouldn't go through today, but that wasn't the point. The point was that now the pressure had moved, not onto Keira, onto them. And in the midst of it all, during that same hearing as the court debated schedules and submissions and procedural delays, Keira finally stood. She hadn't said a word in that courtroom before now, but when she did, the room fell silent like it knew something was about to change. She didn't look at Callahan. She didn't look at her accusers. She looked straight ahead, voice clear but quiet enough that the room had to lean in to catch it. I don't care what you delay. I don't care who you protect. But I will not let the truth die quietly, not in this room, not in this city, and not in me. She sat down before anyone could speak. Even Evan seemed caught off guard. But in that moment something shifted again. Not just in the jury, not just in the judge, in the people watching, in the people outside, and especially in the ones who'd once thought she was already broken. Because now, she wasn't just defending herself. She was leading something they couldn't contain. The tension in that courtroom didn't just hang in the air, it pressed down on every chest like a storm that refused to break. 12 jurors sat stone-faced. The foreman rose slowly, the verdict slip trembling just enough for those who were watching closely to notice. No one dared move. Not the audience, not the officers, not even Keira Langston, who stood as still as the stone she'd been carved from this whole trial. Judge Callahan cleared his throat, but even that felt like it shattered glass. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? Yes, Your Honor, the foreman replied, voice thin but resolute. Please proceed. The foreman glanced once at the sheet, then lifted his head and locked eyes with Keira. In the matter of the state versus Keira Langston on the charges of felony drug possession, obstruction of justice, and criminal conspiracy, he hesitated. Keira didn't blink. The room leaned in as if the walls themselves needed to hear it. We find the defendant not guilty on all counts. And then it hit like thunder. At first silence, then a collective gasp, a single clap, then another. The room trembled with the beginnings of triumph, but it didn't last long. Travis Maddox shot up like a fuse just lit. You can't do this, he barked, spittle flying. She set us up. You think she's clean? 2 courtroom officers moved to restrain him, but he twisted, knocking over a chair. I'll tear this place apart before I answer to a liar like her. You answer to the truth, Travis Keira said loud and calm for the whole room to hear. And it finally caught up. The guards moved fast. They slammed his arms behind his back, snapping the cuffs on as he thrashed and cursed. You hear me? He shouted, face flushed red with rage. This isn't over. You don't get to win. But Keira didn't move. She just stood still like the eye of the storm. Across the room, Ryan Hale never even rose. He sat with his hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. No fight, no words, just the hollow stillness of a man who knew the crash was coming and didn't even try to brace for it. Judge Callahan banged his gavel once, just once more, to signal the end of his own part in this mess, then to restore order. He gathered his papers and stepped off the bench, looking like a man desperate to vanish into the nearest shadow. But then the unexpected stopped him cold. A uniformed officer stepped into his path, clipboard in hand. Judge Callahan, the officer said, voice clipped. As of this morning, all internal affairs investigations will now be overseen by the new Civilian Oversight Office. Callahan blinked clearly, caught off guard. That's not in my docket. Who's heading that office? The officer held his stare. Keira Langston. The room sucked in a collective breath. Travis Maddox stopped struggling. Even Ryan looked up. What? Travis barked, nearly choking on the word. She's in charge of us. He laughed, but it came out wrong. Not amused, not defiant, just broken. This is a joke, right? Keira finally stepped forward, slow, composed. She looked Travis dead in the eye, then let her gaze sweep across the entire courtroom, every uniform, every badge, every man who once thought she'd vanish quietly. You think I'm here to watch you? She said, voice sharp as glass, but calm as breath. I'm not here to punish. I'm not here for revenge. She paused just long enough. I'm here to watch justice. And I don't blink. No one dared speak after that. Not Travis, not Ryan, not even the judge. The gavel had already fallen, but the real judgment had just begun, and this time it was being carried out by the very woman they tried to silence. Her quiet justice. 2 weeks had passed and the headlines had already begun to fade, but Keira Langston didn't follow them. She wasn't on the morning news. She didn't sit down for interviews. She declined the offers for documentaries, op-eds, book deals. She let others talk. Her focus was never on the noise, it was on the work. And the work had just begun. In a modest corner of the city's old municipal building, where the walls still smelled faintly of dust and linoleum, a new placard now rested on a plain door. Keira Langston, Independent Civil Justice Officer. The name wasn't meant to draw attention. It wasn't even bolded. But for the people who knew what it meant, it was a revolution. Inside the office was quiet. No secretary. No receptionist. Just Keira, her desk, a coffee mug, too often forgotten, and a stack of cold cases that had never been revisited. This was not a press room. It was a room where silence meant something was finally being heard. That afternoon, the door opened with a hesitant creak. Lucia Vega stepped in, wearing her uniform with more weight than before, not because of fear, but because she now understood what it meant to wear it fully. Keira didn't look surprised. She simply picked up a folder from the top of the pile and slid it forward. This case has been waiting 12 years, she said quietly. Miguel Carranza, arrested for assault outside his home. He was trying to stop a fight, but no one cared. They booked him in 20 minutes. He never saw an interpreter. His public defender didn't last past the arraignment. Lucia stared at the file, flipping through photocopies that were smudged and thin. Her eyes hardened. And now, he's still in a state facility, lost 2 appeals. No physical evidence, no follow-up. Just paper and silence. Lucia closed the folder gently. This was the one you saved for me. No, Keira said. This is the one that needs light today. You asked me what you could do. This is it. Lucia nodded, her voice low. You still believe we can fix this? Keira looked at her. I don't believe it. I expect it. Lucia took the file and left without another word. She didn't need one. Later that day, Keira took a walk by herself. No press, trailing, no crowd. She moved slowly, deliberately, until she reached a street she hadn't seen in years. The sidewalk was still cracked in the same place. The fence still sagged on one side. It was her old school. She stood there a long time. The gates were locked for the weekend, but the memories came through easy enough. One hallway. One room. One day she was pulled from class and questioned because someone had stolen from the vending machine and she happened to be standing near it. She was 12, and already guilty in the eyes of people who didn't even know her name. She exhaled slowly, then pulled out the same leather notebook Ruth had sent her in jail, the one that carried every thought she wasn't allowed to say aloud. She turned to the last page and wrote one final line. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it rebuilds in silence, brick by quiet brick, name by forgotten name, and when it's ready, it no longer asks for permission. She closed the notebook, tucked it back into her coat. Then Keira Langston turned from the schoolyard, stepped onto the street, and kept walking. Not toward recognition, not toward revenge, but toward whatever name was buried next. Because justice, when it is real, doesn't look back. It just keeps going. Keira Langston's journey wasn't just about proving her innocence. It was about exposing a broken system and reminding us that quiet strength can shake even the loudest walls of power. Her story is a tribute to those who rise without shouting, who lead without asking permission, and who rebuild justice one truth at a time. If this story resonated with you, please like this video, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe to our channel, Mr. Max Stories, for more powerful, true-to-life stories that shine a light where others look away. Your support means the world to us. It gives our creative team the motivation to keep producing meaningful content that stirs the heart, challenges injustice, and honors human dignity. Because here at Mr. Max Stories, we don't just tell stories, we remember what matters. We speak for those who've been forgotten. And we hope you'll stay with us. The next story might just be the one that stays with you forever.